Dave this way. Many of you know Dave, but Dave, you moved to Calgary now, or well, close to Calgary, Cochrane. And is it 15 years ago? Would it be that long?
17, I think.
And
It's been a long time.
why don't you, as you step into what you're going to share today, would you give us a little picture of what you've come through? Because a lot of people don't know that you've been a business owner and ups and downs in life, and even your journey to
Oh my
faith.
gosh.
Yeah, you don't have to do that. Yeah, I know you're succinct, so you'll be able to just give us a sense of what you're going to share from us has come through a number of years of a journey, that an adventure, as you know, that is worth everybody's
Yeah,
story. Go ahead.
I wouldn't use the word adventure every day. That implies something really nice. I was born and raised on Vancouver Island. I spent my first 22 years there. And that was amazing. That was the next best thing to the Garden of Eden looking back, but a 17-year-old doesn't realize that. I moved to Vancouver where I met Sandy at a church in New Westminster, a very churchy church. We were married. We've had 3 really neat kids. I ventured into business twice. They were interesting adventures. I could go on with that for a little while, but the second one actually ended in near bankruptcy. But through that whole process transformed who I was. So I'm not trying to put lipstick on a pig here. It was a rough experience, but it really had some neat impacts. Out of that, we sold our business. We moved to a little place called Hope, where we started getting a little taste of father heart, but we didn't know that, and neither did they. All we know is this was way different than what we'd ever been in. We had no idea what it was, but it was pretty cool. In the meantime, I was working in Alberta for 4 years, flying back and forth, and that was not our goal at all for our family to maybe being away all the time. So we received a job offer in Calgary, and we reluctantly, unwillingly followed God in that, and came here, and it actually has turned out really, really well, because now we ventured into what we're in the middle of a UChurch, and I'm trying to give you the whole story when I'm only partway through it. So this will be interesting, but what I want to do is leave nuggets. I'm going to plagiarize Brant some, because I picked up some of his nuggets and I just freely throw them onwards, to understand the process we're in. The last year or two, or 20, or actually 40, have been a journey in understanding who I am in God. Parts of me are really connected with that. Like I'll share a couple of stories. I get what he thinks of me in certain areas of my life. And in certain areas of my life, I really don't. I do not get it. You can teach me the theology and tell me the sayings, but my heart does not get her yet. And for me, fear is the biggest indicator of disconnection from God. Something Brant, you correct me if I misquote you too badly, said, what is my reaction in this situation saying about my lack of understanding of who God is? Did I get it kind of close? Yeah, not bad. And that's one of those nuggets that sunk inside me. I didn't take notes. I didn't need to write it down. I didn't need to study it. It just went in there and it stuck. And so I'm conscious of that on an ongoing basis. And the one thing that kind of annoys me, there's certain verses in the Bible that kind of annoy me. And one of them is perfect love casts out all fear. Well, if I have fear, that must mean I don't have perfect love in some areas. And I'm okay with that, because I'm on the way to that. So what does this look like? Where do we go from here? Because I think we can all honestly say that we've got fear somewhere. You know, Lance talked about throwing off fig leaves, so I'm going to throw off a fig leaf right here, figuratively. I love teaching, and I feel passionate about it, and I'm excited, but I also get nervous. And that's so there's a fear. Am I nervous about muffing it, about running out of things to say. I don't have the gift of gab like some people do. So there's those fears in the background. And as I looked into this, I started to realize, wow, this is actually a really big deal. So I kind of came back to what's God's end game, and what Brant was showing really illustrates that well. This is about a relationship. It's not a theory, theology, teaching, weekend seminar, listening to Dave, listening to Brant. It's not an A school or a B school or a Z school. These can be all avenues to the final goal, for sure, which is like crazy relationship with our Father and with each other, but not one without the other. So I'm going to poke at the wasp's nest a little bit here about what does fear look like. And I'll share a little bit about what it's been like for me this year. Fear of looking less than perfect today. Fear of COVID. Fear of getting the vaccine. Fear of not getting the vaccine. Fear of old age. Fear of being broke. Fear of being alone, and on and on and on. Like for me, we had a few stock losses in January. And the funny thing is, in the last week of January this year, I had a little note, reminder pop up on my calendar with the word retirement with a question mark behind it. And it popped up in January. I'd forgotten I'd written it there. I'm 61 and I was hoping that would be the time to retire. The stock market dictated maybe not. And then it occurred to me that maybe God is quite fine with me retiring without enough money, according to what I think I need, because that brings him into the picture. I've learned that my independence does not foster a great relationship with God, because if he gives me everything I need right now, my old nature would be awesome. I'll see you at the end, and off we go. When what he wants is a relationship. The other thing I ran into this year, Sandy had a fairly serious back injury at the beginning of the year, at the same time that COVID cropped up, and we were having trouble getting into medical appointments. There was kind of a misdiagnosis there. COVID was going on. And I remember at the start of it, going into the co-op store right at the beginning when it had been declared a pandemic. We didn't know what it was. And I remember being in that store and the fear was palpable. You could almost touch it. There was an absolute silence. The store was packed, but it was silent. A lot of the shelves were empty. I looked at the aisles and there was a lot of people shopping, and then I realized they were actually lined up. Every till was lined up to the back of the store because we didn't know what this was. Was it worse than they were thinking? Was the food supply going to keep up? Doesn't seem to be. So all of these fears were coming up because we live in a society where we have awesome medical care. We have a food supply of everything from all over the world all the time. We have jobs that pay way too much money in Calgary commonly. And we have a real security in that. And all that's getting stirred up. And all of a sudden, I'm realizing who I'm trusting, who and what. And in a lot of cases, it was not God. And he didn't condemn me for it. Maybe I did, but he certainly didn't. And I had a friend, he was a tradesman, and God called him into full-time ministry. So he was going to leave his paycheck behind and venture out into this. And he said to me very honestly one day, I am not the spiritual man I thought I was. Well, I can welcome myself to that club. So like Brant said, what is it that I don't understand about God that causes me to feel this way? So I started nosing around, and I wound up in Gideon, in the book of Judges. Been there a few times before, and started seeing some things, not about Gideon, but about God. And it relates directly to who and what we are today. The Israelites were living under heavy oppression by the Midianites. I mean, they would come in, slaughter their cattle, their sheep. They would take them, leave the Israelites with no food. They were in fear, and they cried out to God. And he sent a prophet to remind them of why they were in this situation. And it was because they were ignoring the Father's wise counsel. So in my old day, when I knew less about God's character, I would have thought, oh, he told them what to do. They didn't do it. He's punishing them. And now I recognize he gave them awesome advice for them to be safe, happy in his loving presence. That was his goal. And they wandered away from that. So then he sent an angel of God who called Gideon a mighty warrior. Now, at this point, Gideon was working in hiding out of fear. He didn't see himself as a mighty warrior. It was kind of like, are you talking to me? And the angel said, absolutely. He looked at who Gideon was, not who he was going to become, but who Gideon was right now. Gideon didn't see who Gideon was. So we can put lots of fancy words around and say, oh, he's going to become that. No, that's who God said he was. So God faced him directly and he said, go in the strength that's yours, save Israel. Haven't I just sent you? And he comes back with kind of like Moses, my clan is weakest, I'm the runt. He's not calling God a liar. He's just expressing who he sees in himself. And I can totally relate to that. There's times that God has called me out to be who I am, and I didn't see it. And what surprised me is, as I stepped into that, I was who God knows I am, not what I thought I was. So God reassures him. He says, you will win. So he asked for a bit of evidence. He said, if you're serious, do me a favor. Gideon went off, prepared a meal, brought it back, put it in front of the angel of the Lord, and he incinerated it in front of him. Totally supernatural for that day. Gideon got on board. God asked him to go destroy the altar of Baal and put up an altar to God. He went off and he did that. He did it at night. He was afraid of the locals, and with good reason. They came and wanted to kill him after. But he did it. And then God's Spirit came over him. And this is important to understand. God didn't give Gideon an assignment and head him off. Great, go do it, son. His Spirit came on him. Gideon raised an army. But he still had those doubts. He still had those fears. So he asked the fleece question, which I think most of us have heard of. He laid out a fleece and God said, God, you make everything damp. And if you've ever lived in a cold, damp climate, you get this. When it gets damp and condenses, everything gets wet. But as he asked, the fleece was not. And then he still had these nagging doubts. So he said, let's do a flip of this. Make the fleece wet and everything else dry. No problem. Done. Was God impatient with him? No. Did he badmouth him? No. He understood who Gideon was. So he took his army and he headed off to the stream. He had a very large army, and God said, you know what? If we send this many troops in and you guys win, you're going to take the credit for yourself. So we're going to make this an unwinnable situation. And they sent 2/3 of the troops home. And then he tested the troops to, I think, mainly for common sense, asked them to drink out of a stream. Whoever kept an eye on things around them, he kept going. So Gideon wound up with this tiny army of 300 and went on. The next part I had never seen before. God said to him, Gideon did not come to him and say, could you prove this is you once more? God said to him, if you want, take your armor bearer and go down into the Midianite camp, sneak in there and listen to what they're saying. God understood even better than Gideon did. He still had some concerns. He was still struggling with who God is. Gideon didn't even ask for another reassurance. God just knew that. He understood him. He cared for him. He went down and he heard the Midianites knew the game was over, that this was a done deal. So in this, God recognized who Gideon was. He didn't berate him. He just understood his son and he cared for him. That was a new one to me. And that's after reading this passage over the years more than a few times. So on they went. And of course, they won the battle. Gideon went on to fight many more battles. But this picture of him working through kindly and gently, this person who in some branches of the traditional Christian church would be seen as weak, But like Lance said, when we let our fig leaves down, we're all weak. And we can let go of that. Moses, very similar. God said, I want you to do this. And he said, no, I don't think so. And again, God saw in Moses who Moses was, not who Moses saw. And in the end, in both cases, God laid it out and he did the battle. We're just going along for the ride. The thing that struck me is he accepted their lack of confidence in God and supported them. He also accepted their lack of confidence in themselves. They didn't see who they were in God yet, and that's okay. We don't have to put the fig leaves. We don't need to pretend that we're something that we're not. We can just be who we absolutely are, and that's pretty cool. So what does this journey from fear to faith to trust look like for us? I mean, he's probably not going to send you to take on Pharaoh in Washington or Ottawa. Probably not going to take on a big army. Jesus didn't. He came to transition us from self-dependent, lonely orphans to a welcoming, loving, secure place in his family. That's huge. It may take place while doing something with him for sure. That I'm finding more and more that I grow in him through engaging with him. And sometimes he's engaged with me and I don't even know it till after. And that's part of the coolness. Even in the rough times where I felt very distant from God or totally separated from him, looking back, yeah, he was actually in the midst of that, orchestrating my life for a predetermined outcome is what comes to mind, but he has plans in place for me that I'm not even aware of, and they're plans for good. We have in the church frequently asked and pleaded for God to come. Please be with us, come Holy Spirit, and so on and so forth. And something that occurred to me a couple of weeks ago, he's actually already here within us if we're a follower of Christ, and he wants out. He wants out in partnership with us to run amok in this world. And I say run amok because he's not organized the way we're organized. He does things that seem bizarre, and in the end, looking back, we realize that was exactly the right thing for this time. So going out into this freedom is quite an experience. What I've whined about over the years is this is taking way too long. I'm 61. Why isn't this happening at 21? Well, got a couple of stories around that. This process takes time. About 20 years ago, I was in a fairly rough spot. Our business was failing. Things at home were rough. My dog just died. It could have been a country song. And off I went to a little weekend in Kelowna, unwillingly, because I actually wanted to back out of it, but I thought that would cause too big a flap at home, so I just went. And I went for the weekend. And at one point in the weekend, we were asked to just get down on our knees and worship. So I did. And the fellow there had a vision over me that he said was so weird. He actually didn't want to share it, but he did. And it was actually of me on a tropical beach, which for any of you who know me is my happy place. I was climbing up a coconut tree and falling down it and hitting those ridges on the way down. Everyone thunk, thunk, thunk. And the fellow said, God's telling him that these are losses in my life, our business, home difficulties in a relationship, the dog. And I was losing one thing at a time. And he said to me, the dreams you've had are not bad dreams, but he's going to give me a different set of dreams. And oh my gosh, has he done that? I came back from that transformed. What happened there, though, is I went in a really ugly state, angry, bitter, just foul to the core. And what struck me is that God came and met me in a very gentle, healing way without condemning me, not a word against me. you could have taught me that in 50,000 seminars and 1,000 books and every conceivable way, but once you've experienced that, it's done. Nobody can undo that. And so God is taking us in from a place of theology, from understanding intellectually, into experiencing something. Because once you've experienced it, it's done. You can't undo that. That gave me an understanding of God that's never been shaken to this day. Have I had my off days? Oh yeah, piles. But that killed condemnation for me. Because I thought, if you can come in this mess and love me, wow, that says a lot about you. And then because this process takes time, we can't get from A to Z in one day. For instance, 17 years ago, when God made it really clear that we were to move to Alberta, wow, that was tough, because my oldest son had always struggled in school. And he had finally gotten into a school where he was thriving. He was doing well. And then God gives us every indication that he wants us to move to Alberta. And I'm thinking, my son's finally settled. He's okay. I don't want to move. We don't want to move. We want to be together as a family again. And my son, who had the most at stake in all of this, came to us, and we had a family meeting, and he said, God has made this so obvious that we should move there, that we just need to go. And then around the same time, I was in downtown Calgary, just tormented by the thought of pulling him out of this good situation. And the only time I've ever heard God audibly speak was then. And he said, "You trust me with your son." That's all he said. And the immediate answer was no, but that very situation built my trust. And we moved. Has it been easy? Nope. Has it been worth it? Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, there's really good things happening here. And the last thing that opened my eyes, it took 17 years, is just before the move, our friend Kevin came to us. And he said, if you don't move to Alberta, God's actually okay with that. He's not going to leave you. He's not going to forsake you. He's good with that. That was so far over my head, I couldn't even comprehend it. Because I come from a bit of a military background. I was in the Naval Reserve. And, in that environment, when the captain says jump, you ask how high. You don't ask if. And so that was deeply ingrained in my psyche. And to make that transition to a God who is okay with options, that didn't even register. Nowadays, totally get that. Like, oh my gosh, what a transition. That's taken 17 years. So don't sweat that this process takes a while. It's not even going to take your lifetime. It's going to take longer. So with those comforting words, you could relax. Don't feel disappointed that it's not coming along as quick as you hope it is. It comes as you're able to. And he is 100% fine with that. So don't sweat that. So here we are today. We're somewhere along this journey. We're somewhere along this story of what is your life. Where do we go from here? We kind of have some inklings of what the end looks like. We know what the past looked like. We're not in the past. We're not at the end. We're here today. So how do you respond? And I've been slowly learning over the years to hear God's voice and respond to it. In the old days, probably about 25 years ago, we would have a conventional worship service and what have you. And in the middle of the worship service, my mind would wander. I have a great imagination. It's in 60 places a second on a good day. And in the middle of worship, I would be all over the map. I would be dreaming, daydreaming, imagining this, imagining that. It took me about 10 years to finally realize that was God speaking to me. He inherits and now I find in the midst of worship like that, worship is many things, but that's one of them. I will get absolute instantaneous downloads of teachings or this or that are just crazy. So now I've transitioned from fighting God to actually working with him. So that's a fairly significant thing. So I'm learning to listen. I'm learning to recognize God's voice and to follow the promptings. And we had a little situation in our church in Hope where a lady showed up to the service one day. She was in rough shape, and Sandy noticed her. And she was prompted in her heart to just bake her some cookies and bring them to her. She found out where she lived and so on. She brought them over to her and gave them to her. She was in a little rundown hotel in Hope. She was living with a fairly rough-cut gentleman. Seemed to be a tough situation. And you might think, okay, she baked her some cookies. That's nice. That's a good thing. What we didn't know was the whole story. She was actually dying. She had HIV, and she only had about a week or so to live. She was sent to Hope by the BC government because that was a cheap place to put people up on welfare. The hotels were cheap there. In a situation with this fellow, we have no idea what it was like. And it was her birthday. So we think baking some cookies and bringing them to someone might be deemed by the world as insignificant, but put yourself in that woman's shoes. Nearly dead, unloved, probably a drug addict, had a very rough life, and here on her final birthday, somebody shows up with a gift for her. Is that insignificant? We all know it's not. So when you're feeling those promptings in your heart, don't minimize them. You have no idea what the receiving end is of whatever that is on your heart. That's a way of hearing God. He's speaking to you. He's prompting you. He lives within you. And a lot of the desires you have are his desires to bless people. So as you listen to these promptings and follow through, you're going to see results that build your faith and build your trust. That's massive. One of my passions is I love to support young men. I grew up, my dad was very reclusive. He died when I was 21. So in a large sense, I was fatherless. And I have a very big heart for young men finding their way in life. They need someone to come up beside them and say, you know what, you're okay. You're not as weird as you think. God looks at you and loves you, and you're completely normal. Let's go on and build a friendship and just hang out together. That's one of my passions. That's also God's passion, right? That's my heart aligning with God, and we go out and we do this together. And this is amazing. So as your heart grows in alignment with his, your passions are likely his too. I can't remember Stephen Hill who talked about how the church has separated the secular from the holy. And that's wrong. We're just in the middle of life. So if I go to a rock concert with someone and connect with them, that's not secular. It's holy, actually. We can get rid of that segregation. He's made you with those passions. So you don't need to suppress who you are. He created you, and he's good with that. Because honestly, he does a whole lot better of a job at creating than I do. I talked to a young fellow one time. He was on his way to Africa, and I kind of picked up that he was not 100% sure of his value on the trip. And I just said to him, if God wanted to send someone else, he would have sent someone else. But he's sending you because you are the person for that job. And this young man in that trip had the most amazing conversations with some of the men in that area. One of the conversations was helping to explain to them why, if adultery was bad for their wife, why it was also bad for them. They had a bit of a misconception on that. So he spoke deeply into these guys' lives. You know, If he wants Brant to go somewhere, he'll send Brant. But if he wants you to go, you are the perfect candidate for it. So feel free and do that. The other thing I've been noticing in this journey is freedom to play. It's okay to take this newfound place in his family for a test drive. Stephen Hill, he has a neat illustration. He says, God's got a backyard. He's not particularly worried if you're on the swings as opposed to the teeter-totter. He's getting a little concerned if you head outside of the safety area. But there's actually freedom in this. And that goes back to when we were moving to Alberta. I totally did not get that God was able to handle more than one choice. And so now I'm feeling a freedom to go out and follow those leadings in my heart. And if they're not quite right, you know what? The sun's still going to rise tomorrow. It's fine. It's not an issue. If I get into a really unsettled situation, then maybe I need to stop and think, okay, Father, is this right where you want me? But outside of that, there's a lot of latitude. And his end game in this is always to bring you into an adventurous relationship. Like what Lance is leading right now, I hit upon the book Wild at Heart, 15 years ago, 17 years when we first moved here. It hit me so deeply and I had no idea what to do with it. I remember there's one little passage in there saying that so many men inside the church are sitting in the pews, bored out of their trees, trying to be better people. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's right where I'm at. And that is not where I want to be. So that was his first little nugget dropped into me. And it did not all unfold over the next 7 days. And I was a transformed man. It's been unfolding over the next 17 years. But I feel more passionate and excited about life at 61 than I have in virtually the rest of my life. And I have no idea where it's going to go. And that's okay. Because I know it's going to be cool. So in the end, he's bringing us into relationship with him and with each other. I'm kind of amazed that I've gotten to know some people better on Zoom than I have with 5 years of sitting in UChurch at the University of Calgary. That's a little bizarre, but it's happening. And one of the people I encountered at UChurch was Papa John Hutchinson. I've been accused of being succinct. He was way beyond succinct at the end of his life. I sat with him one day and he said to me, you know what? All it amounts to is he's my papa and I'm his son, period. He didn't say one more word and he's really got it. That's it. And as we come to realize what that means, it's crazy enormous. It's not just a statement that he's my dad and I'm his son. It's what that means. And that's coming over time. So be content with where you're at. Desire more, sure, but don't be impatient. Don't slam yourself for that. Remember, perfect love casts out all fear. So all these fears we're dealing with, he's going to keep working through our lives. As his perfect love grows, that fear drops away. I don't need to worry about my paycheck at retirement because he's got me. Now, does my heart know that? Not fully. No, we're not there yet. We're in process. But am I where I was at 20 years ago? Not even close. No, it's been good. You can't go out and muster this up yourself and say, I'm going to be more faithful. I'm going to not fear. That works right until we get COVID or I get laid off. This is something he will unpack. So don't try and rush it, because we get into a position where we start putting on fig leaves because we try and pretend we're something we're not. And that just creates a big mess. And then Lance has more work to do, helping us get the fig leaves off. So start where you're at. What's your heart telling you? Right? If it's telling you to do something that's not biblical, okay, there's an issue there. But you know what? If God's prompting something in your heart and it lines up with the Bible, go test drive it. You might think it's little, it could be massive. Is it to reconcile a relationship? Well, in the right time, in God's time, that has a really high success rate? Is it a visit a lonely neighbor? Here's a weird one, rest. That is a 4-letter word in our society because we need to be performing 24/7 overtime. That is so unbiblical. What did God do in the 7th day? He rested. So if rest is good enough for him, it might be okay for us. And I'm finding in this time of COVID, there are so many distractions taken away. I found that life has slowed down. I'm finding I'm connecting with them better in ways that are unconventional. We're actually finding some key relationships from we see them less, and it suddenly made us want each other more. So it helped put things into perspective. Maybe God wants you to travel halfway around the world and care for a nation. Okay, that could be the big one. I'm willing to bet you he won't do that until he takes you through a whole bunch of other stuff. He's not going to drop a bomb on you that is totally inconceivable and stresses you out beyond belief. He's taking you where you are at today, and we'll walk forward in that. Whatever he calls you into is important because it's about your heart and other people's hearts, and that is all that matters. That's it, nothing more. Not building a church, a kingdom, a ministry. None of that matters unless the end goal is to reconcile us with God, us with each other, and other people with God. The ministry of reconciliation. So a little statement that came out of another one of Stephen Hill's books is taking things by the sole of your foot. You're not going to hop in a military transport with 500 troops and parachute in and the job is done. What it means to take it by the sole of your foot is when the Israelites started crossing the Jordan into the promised land, it was one step at a time, one city at a time. And that's the way it'll be for you. He's not taking you beyond where you're at now. And one of the reasons he wants to take you through is because you're not ready for everything. I'm certainly not. But he wants us to take us through to a good place. He's not wanting us to be kingdom builders in the sense that in the church, kingdom builder meant a lot of sweat and toil and what have you. He's taking us through to relationship. So all of these steps, all of these things that squeeze us a little bit are to take us through to something absolutely amazing and to take us out of slavery. It's not to test us. It's not to see how faithful we are and how good we are. It's to bring us into freedom. And you are not solely responsible for the outcome. I'm kind of the theology now that he does 99% of the work and I do 1%. I might be wrong on that. I'm not a math major, but I've come to realize I'm not responsible for the outcome of my life. I respond to him, but thank goodness he provides for me, empowers me, changes me. I'm finding a good friend of mine from work came to our house one night. One of the co-authors of The Shack was here, and he said to him, "How do I connect with God?" And Wayne Jacobson's response was, maybe you don't need to connect with him. Maybe you need to just relax and let him connect with you. This guy is a super high performer from Venezuela, engineer, like has all his T's crossed and I's dotted. That blew him away. He blew into my office the next morning and he said, that changed my life more than anything else in my entire life. Just that one statement. So that's important for us to know. Let him come and be our dad. One of the things that has really struck me about being in a place of trust with God, I sort of see faith preceding trust. We go out in faith, we're not quite sure of the outcome, we see something neat happen, over time that builds trust. And he said, what if you were down to your last $50 and you really wanted to give it to someone and you joyfully did that because you were fully confident that it would be given back to you? Who's there? Not me. But I'm on my way. I see, yeah, exactly, Rob. but we see something, and I want that. I think that is amazing that I could live in that kind of freedom. And am I farther than I was 20 years ago? Big time. Am I there? No, but I'm not condemned. I'm not struggling with that. I'm actually more content with who I am right now at 61 than I ever have been before. Would part of me prefer to have this at 21? You betcha. But I wasn't ready for it. There's no way I could have actually taken that in. So no sweat. I'm learning through experience who I am to him. Like I was telling you about that weekend in Kelowna, I learned who he was to me by that experience, not by a teaching. The teaching sort of awakened me to, okay, that's a nice possibility. Experiencing it cemented it in my heart. I'm starting to recognize his pleasure in me, and actually raising kids helped me with that, because I remember my oldest son, he came to me one day and he said, "You must hate me." And I said, "What do you mean? Why do you say that?" And he said, "Sometimes I can be a real jerk." I thought, well, so can I. What he didn't understand as a son, that I have never hated him, even when he's been totally off the wall. But as a son, he couldn't understand that because he had not been through the experience of having a son. So my kids have taught me a lot about God's heart. There's certain things that I can relate to. And the verse I've struggled with just crazy with is that God delights in me. I could handle he tolerates me. I could accept that he puts up with me. I could sort of get around my head that he grudgingly accepts me and loves me in spite of my shortcomings, but that's a lie, all of it. The word delight implies a lightness of heart, happiness to see, and I'm slowly transitioning in through experience with him, his delight in me. Still not there, not by a fair bit, but it's coming. And this, like I say, has come through experience, has come through following promptings, in my heart, listening, following that as I can, following the little things, seeing the successes, following the bigger things, seeing successes. It's building my faith and trust for what is to come. It's building my confidence that he does have my back. And I still look over my shoulder because I'm not there. So these seemingly small things build faith, and over time, those build trust, which is a big deal. Faith is the evidence of things not seen, and trust is something that is made through experience, assured reliance. So he's taking you on a journey to become sons and daughters. That's a given. So you can rest in that. Don't panic. This isn't a rush. Even in the midst of the tough stuff, he has more of a handle, of a hand in the situation than you could ever dream of. Do we want things to go well with our kids, with our spouse? Absolutely. And as much as we want that, he's on board a million times more. But just as it takes time in your life for things to unfold in him, it does in those around you. So things won't happen in our timing. Just respond to him. And my closing thought is, enjoy the ride. This truly is an adventure. It's not a performance thing with a bunch of check boxes that people are rating you on. It's advancing into a relationship with him and with each other. So enjoy the ride. If you take nothing more out of today, enjoy the ride. Thanks.
So good, Dave. I'm sure everybody could comment and acknowledge that, but I have what I want to do, and what I sense to do, Dave, if you're okay with this, is allow some questions. So,
Totally.
or just probe some things, and
that's the most fun.
Yeah, you didn't just sum up your life, you exposed it, and you revealed the beauty of the wisdom of the journey. And it's so easy to get off track. I guess I have a question for you, Dave. would be just to kick it off, and then some of you can raise your hand or jump in. But my question today would be, in this journey that the adventure that we're describing it as, where has other people, what is the community, what does that look like for you as it changed? Is that part of the process and how he's gotten to your heart? Family, community, relationships, because you now move from different places. Yeah.
I used to feel a little bit guilty in UChurch because we had a whole whack of university students there. And some people would be busy taking notes and this and that and the other thing and studying. And I felt like a slacker, because I am to some degree. I want to do the least amount of work to get from point A to point B. What I found, though, is that the relationship is huge, because there are nuggets dropped into me that I do not need to write notes on. And I can go back 40 years and there will be some significant nugget that somebody has dropped into my life that has transformed it. It's been like, holy smokes. And this has all come through relationship. Another thing I noticed in relationship, and I'd never experienced this before, is I'd be sitting with friends having a conversation, and God would drop part of a nugget into one person and the other person would finish it. And that happened commonly. What that drew me back to is that verse. He says, where two or more gathered, there I am also. He didn't say where one or more are gathered. He said two or more. And that's been really sitting in the back of my mind a lot. Friends have encouraged me. They have restored me. They have shown me things about God that are just blinding revelations, not just information. And relationship has been stunning and imperfect. I had to throw that last word in there because that's the truth of it.
It's good.
Imperfect does not mean it's not stunning.
Yeah, that's great. Does anyone have any questions? Because I could keep asking Dave questions all day long, but maybe we'd like to probe the well of wisdom a bit here.
Dave, what's you mentioned you love mentoring men, but what makes your heart come alive in this adventure these days besides that? Like, what are the simplest things? What makes your heart come alive?
Possibility. I've always been a dreamer, and I've always written that off as, yeah, that's just dreaming. I'm seeing stuff coming up in my heart that I've never seen before, like a passionate love for other people. And I come from a home that was really emotionally repressed. Didn't know it at the time. Nice home, caring home, good home. An illustration of the extreme of that is we went for one session on marriage counseling in Abbotsford, and then we moved to Alberta, so that died. But they had us fill out a little form, and on the form it said, describe a time that your family resolved a conflict. So I'm 41 years old, and I cannot think of one, not one. Like, we were not communicative, could not resolve a problem if our life depended on it. And so that's what I came out of. And that expanded into our hearts, very repressed. So for me to feel this love and passion cropping up in me is really amazing. That's God's doing, because that's nothing I could change myself. So I'm just excited about what's coming. I'm 61 and I'm not scouting around for retirement homes and golf carts and what have you in Arizona. I'm excited for what's to come, and I don't quite know what that looks like. Got lots of dreams. Brent knows all about those. So I'm just excited, and I'm excited to be in this community here, because, to quote a corny old expression, this is what's now and happening. Like, this is people's hearts being brought alive in relationship, and it's coming, each of us at a different place. That's what's exciting me now, is possibility. What's coming. I've already seen a whole bunch of stuff happen is what's coming next. I'm almost like a kid on Christmas Day. I can't wait to go open the present tomorrow morning and see what it is. So that's what's exciting me. Was that sufficiently vague?
It's good. Thanks, Dave.
Hey, Dave, you mentioned that in the past when you were enjoying worship or whatever, your mind was racing around and thinking this and hearing that and all these dreams and things like that. And then later you realized, oh, that's God speaking to me and putting stuff in my heart. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my question is, how do you? What's been some of your processes, or what's your process to process those thoughts that come into your heart, or how does that kind of fit into the adventure? Have you connected those things with adventure?
One thing he said, I was enjoying worship. I actually wasn't. I was frustrated beyond belief because I couldn't shut my mind off to actually participate in worship. Some of it has been really straightforward. Some of it is just a downloaded plain teaching that I share, and it's like from start to finish. Other things are deep-seated dreams that I'm trying to test out, and like, God, is this your dream or my dream? And I'm starting to realize they are our dreams. So what I'm processing through is, do they come and go? And I've got certain dreams that have come and stayed, and they're strong. And so I'm kind of looking at, where do we go this? So the processing part is dual. Sometimes it's just teaching, simple, share it. It's concrete, A to Z. Other times it's a more significant dream. I share them with people because sometimes somebody can see into you instantaneously and say, oh, what about this? And you realize, oh, that's just me, and it's not heading down a good place. Other times they jump on board and say, yeah, like I was sharing some stuff with Litz the other day. And oh my goodness, you're an enthusiastic person, Litz. And so it fed my dream. And you know what? God speaks through other people. So the testing thing for me is sharing. That really, the Canadian society is not necessarily known for being out there and in each other's face. And I'm starting to come against that. Because that's a good thing. As you share and bounce ideas, God works within that. I come back to that. Wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, that impacts me really deeply. He is all about relationship with each other, and he works through each of us individually to put different pieces of the puzzle together. So that's what I do. I share and test and get feedback, and I talk a lot, which is uncommon for a really quiet introvert, which is what I used to be.
Thank you.
By the way, just one note, don't put yourself in a box. Sometimes we look at ourselves and we say, this is me. Well, Gideon was in a box. Actually, I think he was in a wine press hiding out, and God pulled him out of that, because Gideon needed to see who he was in God, not who he was in his own mind. So don't keep yourself in that box.
I'm going to ask a question, Dave. When I love the fact that we could, if we all pulled out a sheet of paper right now and checked off, what fears have we experienced, over the last, you could say day, 24 hours a week or month, or even the last year, this whole pandemic. And curious, I'm sure people would be curious, when those float up into your heart now from time to time in different ways, how do you now deal with that compared to, say, 15 years ago or 20 years ago?
I try not to suppress them, because that's what you were trained to do in the Navy. Like, I was a captain of a training ship, so I don't get up in the bridge and announce to my crew how scared I am of going across this major storm in the Strait of Georgia. You repress that, and you put on the bold face and strong and carry on. So I'm expressing it more. taking off the fig leaves, as Lance said, being real about that. I'm also not trying to fix it, because I don't have the ability to fix that. I don't have the ability to force myself to trust God. So I'm not trying to rush the process artificially, and that's about it.
Very good.
I see Daniel from Vancouver down there.
Yeah. Say hello, Daniel. Who's that?
Hey guys, love to be here. Thank you. Thanks, Dave, for sharing.
Yeah, great
Love
stuff.
to see you too. So they're the pioneers. They've moved out to BC. Those of you who know me know that's on my heart too, as a possibility.
Oh, welcome here.
What are your thoughts out there about fear? What do we do with it? Well, I think Tara's got her hand up.
Go ahead, Tara.
Yeah, I was going to ask Dave. Thank you for sharing. It's wonderful, kind of what you're sharing. And I was going to ask about when you say that you're recognizing that you can't fix it, like you can't be in a place where you fix yourself and and trust God. How do you rest in that tension to receive from Him? Because it's easy to be like, oh yeah, we can't fix it, but then I'm either like, well, screw that, give up, or oscillate. No, there must be something that I can do.
I had a fairly typical characteristic of wanting to fix stuff, and my kids were happy to tell me to butt out because what I was trying to do was force things. And so there's sort of two things you can do. One is go in and force it and try and solve the situation, which if the other party isn't ready, isn't going to fly. It may even make it worse. Another option is to butt out and give up and leave, like leave the situation permanently. And that's not a good one either. The third one is to be patient, as hard as that may be, and wait for His promptings, wait for that door to open and walk through it. And that can be days, it can be months. Unfortunately, sometimes it can be years. But don't close the door. Just be listening and waiting. And when the opportunity comes, go through it. I've asked myself years ago, why do I walk past 50 people in downtown Calgary and then suddenly feel like there's somebody I want to go and help or support? It's because God knows when the right time is for the right person. And we need to be okay with that, even though we're crawling on the inside. Because me stepping into the situation at a time of my choosing when it wasn't the right time did not only help the situation, it made it worse. So I'm coming to terms with the fact that I don't have all of the answers, and I never will. He does. And to just rest and wait for that door to open. And slowly over time, and this is nothing of my own doing, I'm becoming more restful in crappy situations because my trust is starting to grow and know that, yeah, He actually does have this under control. That whole concept of God having things in control always troubled me because I would read the newspaper and watch the 5 o'clock news. And then I would read, God is in control. And I think, okay, something's not clicking here. And then a fellow by the name of Greg Mitchell came one time and he was speaking about, was it justice versus mercy, Brand?
Could be, yeah. Justice triumphs, mercy triumphs justice, yeah.
Well, he was talking about how there's just enough mercy in the world, just enough justice. He said, if there was more justice in the world, we would all have our gooses cooked. And he said, if there was more mercy in the world, it would be absolute chaos and bedlam. And that actually I had to chew over for about 3 years. That made a lot of sense. He actually is in control. The problem is we don't see behind the scenes. We don't see what's going on. Before I became a believer, I worked for a company of Christians who really impacted me. And at one point I had this elderly trio from the Baptist church come to my home the odd night to talk to me. But what really brought me around was the Holy Spirit at 3 o'clock in the morning prompting me night after week after month. So really, that told me that everyone else is no different. He is actively at work in their lives, even though we don't see it. And I can actually take some rest in that. But my goodness, is there a part of me that wants to go fix it? But just based on past history, I know that's not the best outcome. So it's been a process. It's been a 60-year process. And I'm just seeing over those 60 years, better outcomes when I let him mess with the situation than me. When we can, I tend to have knee-jerk reactions to things, more so in the past. And as I'm dumbing that down, I'm we have a role to play in this too. And as I shut down my knee-jerk reactions and stop and let God work that through, just see neat results, because I'm not shooting off at the lip and trying to fix something in the way I think. I'm actually going to the one who knows the background situation and letting him prompt me. And it's better, way better.
I'm just going to comment that Erin's got her hand up, but I was just spent a few days with some business leaders in another city, and I find it's very interesting. They're believers. They have quite an influential birthright in the area they're in, and they're experiencing lots of pressures right now and fires, and to the point where they're almost exasperated. But they haven't had a chance to drink in what you've been drinking in, Dave. And it was interesting, as one of the comments that came out was that just reminding them that sometimes the calling in our lives, that leadership gifting, perhaps if you're in a place where you're in positions where you're constantly having to solve problems on other people, for other people's behalf, whether it's companies or family or even your own life, the tendency is to try and take what's in the marketplace, it has a time limit on it, and then make it happen in your own heart for yourself. And that has been an interesting wake-up call to kind of go, no, there's that third option, that it might be left, it might be right, but what about the wait and that rest, so that you can, I mean, there's lots of potentials in it, so you can hear, so you can receive, so there's that you're not isolationally trying to make this decision on your own. You're part of something bigger. And but boy, that's a tough one to learn when we've grown up mostly having to defend for ourselves.